today the feast of St. Paul the Cross. We'll be back here again in Quebec. The epistle for this feast taken from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 1. Brethren, Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not in wisdom and speech, lest the cross of Christ should be made void. For the word of the cross to them indeed that perish is foolishness, but to them that are saved, that is, to us, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the prudence of the prudent I will reject. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For seeing that in the wisdom of the world, and the wisdom of the God, the world by wisdom knew not God, it pleased God by the foolishness of our preaching to save them that believe. For both the Jews require signs, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews indeed a stumbling block, and unto the Gentiles foolishness. But unto them that are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. And then the gospel. Just taking that according to St. Luke, chapter 10. At that time the Lord appointed also other 72, and he sent them 2 and 2 before his face unto every city and place whither he himself was to come. And he said to them, the harvest indeed is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he send laborers into this harvest. Go, behold, I send you as lambs among the wolves. Carry neither purse, nor scrip, nor shoes, and salute no man by the way. Into whatsoever house you enter, first say, peace be to this house. And if the Son of Peace be there, your peace shall rest upon him. But if not, it shall return to you in the same house, and in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they have, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. Remove not from house to house. And into what city wheresoever you enter, and they receive you, eat such things as are set before you, and heal the sick that are therein, and say to them, the kingdom of God is come nigh unto you. And those are the words of today's Holy Gospel. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, amen. Today, a few considerations on a problem of the priesthood in our present battle in this stage of the fight after Vatican II. There's a new breed of priests that have a different way of looking at the battlefield than in previous times. And a consideration of this, and to remember that we are now in the time of the battle. It happens in any war. And by the 20th century changes things a little bit because of our modern communications. But imagine before the cell phone and before the faxes and telegraphs and the modern way of quick communication. In olden times, it happened many times. Soldiers, or the soldiers of the king, under the direction of the king, representatives of the king, carrying the authority of the king, march into battle. And they obey their generals, and the generals obey the chief general behind, and they obey the king. And they have instructions, go and conquer a certain land. Our instructions are pretty clear, conquer the entire earth. So we have to go and conquer the entire earth. And anyone that is not a member of Christ, anyone that is not inside the church, needs to be, as far as possible, brought into the church. But what happens in a battle is that oftentimes there are soldiers that are cut off from the front. Cut off from communications with their commanders, and they are behind enemy lines. What do you do when you're behind enemy lines? When you're behind enemy lines, there are two possible reactions of a soldier. One soldier behind enemy lines, his primary focus is, I have to survive until I get back to my main army. And my principal duty is to survive until I get back to my principal and to the main army. So if I am passing by a bridge that needs to be blown up, an enemy bridge, but I don't have orders to blow up that bridge, if I go and try to blow up that bridge, or if I tend to take out a machine gun nest, or if I try to take out an outpost, a keep that's guarded by the enemy, I don't have orders from my commander to do so. I don't have the backup of the artillery. I don't have the support of soldiers around me, only myself and the few soldiers with me. It is better for me to simply survive, hold on, and wait until I get back in connection with the main army. And I will not engage the enemy, and because I'm not given any orders to do so. And in fact, if I do engage the enemy, it's very possible that I could cause damage to the overall plan of my commander, because I don't know what the commands are. I'm not connected with the main army anymore. Hence, my first duty, get back to the main army and keep a low profile and survive until such time as I can be in ordinary circumstances with the main army. Then there's another soldier behind enemy lines. I am behind enemy lines. I'm cut off from communication to my main commander. But I know what the objective is of war: to defeat the enemy, destroy the enemy in battlements, to conquer his territory, and to fight until death or a victory. Now, if I can survive until I get back to the main encampment, fine, I will survive until I get back to the main encampment. If I die behind enemy lines, then I die behind enemy lines. But I will die a soldier, and I will fight in the army, and I can function as a true representative of the army. And if I find myself captured behind enemy lines, the enemy will know that this is a soldier of the army of the king. And this soldier is being put in the prison camp like other soldiers, treated as other soldiers. But the soldier is to fight. So we have been behind enemy lines for 50 years now, since Vatican II. And as time progresses and things go on and on and on, we are getting into an army of onodas. The army is more and more an army of onodas. And Onoda was a Japanese soldier who, in 1945, was an island in the Philippines of Mindanao. No, not Mindanao, that's Iloilo. But the island near Batangas. So he was an island. He was cut off from his army. And he figured his principal duty was simply to stay alive, not get captured, and he decided to stay alive. And there are decisions he made. In 1975, he was found. From 1945 until 1975, Onoda survived as a soldier of the Japanese army. And the way he survived for 30 years till the war was over, not knowing that the war was over, not knowing that it was defeated, and when they finally came and spoke to him in 1975, they said, Onoda, the war is over. He says, I don't accept that until my commander tells me. So they had to get the Emperor of Japan to send a message to him. The war's been over for 30 years. It's over now. You can come out and you can surrender. What did he do during those 30 years? During those 30 years, he didn't blow up a single bridge. He didn't shoot a single enemy. He didn't disobey a single command. He didn't do it. In fact, one thing that he noted is he realized, instead of no, they talked to him, how did you survive 30 years? He said, one reason I survived 30 years, I was very careful not to kill too many cows or too many sheep of any farmer. Because I knew that if cows and sheep disappeared from some farmers and they would find out that they were killed by somebody, they would go and kill me. They would find me and kill me. So I made sure that I would kill one sheep from this farm, another cow from that farm, in such a way that would make sure that it would look like the cow or the sheep died some kind of a natural death or by the animals, and they wouldn't find out that someone shot it. And if someone did shoot him, they could think that maybe a neighbor did it and not somebody in their own woods. He hid successfully for 30 years. And he successfully remained faithful to his emperor for 30 years. He never disobeyed an order, and he refused to surrender. What kind of a soldier was Onoda? There are now thousands of onodas in the Catholic Church. Soldiers that are not going to surrender. That is, they're not going to celebrate the new Mass anymore, if they were already celebrating before. They're not going to believe in modernism anymore. They're not going to teach heresy anymore. They will not do these wicked things, but they will not disobey their commanders, and they will not go against them, because after all, it is a divine law. But we must obey our superiors, and the superiors are telling us, you can't have a parish. And the superiors are telling us, you can't build a church. You can't say the Latin Mass in public. You can't function. And so we have an army of onodas. This army, if Onoda, who was just being obedient and following his Japanese customs, had lived maybe 1,000 years ago, the commander would ask him, you were 30 years a soldier. Did you not try to engage the enemy? You didn't engage the enemy. You were 30 years a soldier, and all you did was hide out. That's not what a soldier is. A soldier is one who is engaged in war, and one that fights against his enemy. He is also one that implements the commands of his superiors, and there's a general command in every war, which is to conquer the enemy, to defeat the enemy, to spread the kingdom of our kingdom. And we are following the kingdom of Christ. There are general orders that are given in each war. What happens when a commander is, and there are rules of combat, what happens when we're separated behind enemy lines? When we're separated behind enemy lines, whoever the highest ranking officer is, he might be a private first class over a private fourth class. He might be a sergeant, he might be a corporal, he might be a lieutenant, he might be a general, he might be an admiral. Whoever the highest individual or captain at whatever level the highest commander is, if he meets other soldiers, he's to gather them together. They have general instructions. They are to try their best to get back to the main forces if they're able to do so. If they're not able to do so, they are to make life miserable for their enemy. And they are trying to avoid surrendering unless there is no other choice. I mean, when it comes to the supernatural battle, surrender is never an option. In normal natural battles, surrender is an option. But in our supernatural battle, surrender means eternal damnation. So surrender is not an option. So therefore, we must discomfort the enemy. We must fight against the enemy. We must build the kingdom of Christ. So that when the main army comes, they come into a certain city to conquer it. They discover, oh, the city has already been conquered. And there is already our order set up in this city. When Cortez came to the New World, he was not able to send a fax back to Spain to say what he was doing. He was not able to communicate back to Spain about his decisions in the battlefield. He made decisions in the battlefield and no one was above him. He had to make the decisions, and he made them in the name of the king. And the king backed up his decisions. He was in the battlefield. He fought as a soldier of Spain and a soldier of Christ to conquer New Spain, which we now call Mexico, to bring an end to human sacrifice, to establish the kingdom of Christ. So he worked without any direct one above him. And this happens all the time in battle. Many, many times in battle, that's what we must do. Now, priests of the 1970s recognized this simple truth of war. They were soldiers of the army. And each one had a different personality, but they all did exactly the same thing. They discovered that the enemy had infiltrated the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And they discovered that their souls of their sheep were on the path to hell due to the modernist teaching of Vatican II. And they discovered also that the new Mass was destroying the souls of their sheep. And there were sheep scattered like soldiers in the battlefield. Their commanders have been taken away from them. They no longer have captains in their parishes, which are the priests who are called the captains of the church. Their captains have turned to the side of the enemy. And now the sheep, the soldiers, who we call the soldiers of Christ, who receive the sacrament of baptism and confirmation, they are wandering throughout the world. And they want to fight against the enemy, but they need captains. Their captains have turned away from God. Their captains have turned to the camp of the enemy, and they are driven out of their own churches because they have been conquered by the enemy. A conciliar church has conquered their local parish in which they were baptized. A conciliar church has come in and taught them a new catechism. A conciliar church has come in and brought them a new Mass as well. And so they find themselves wandering, and they call out, "Are there any captains in the woods? Are there any captains behind enemy lines?" And a captain comes forth. "I am a captain. What brigade do you belong to?" "I belong to the Redemptorist Brigade. I belong to the Jesuit Brigade. I belong to the Diocese of Louisville, Kentucky. My pastor, Father Hannafin. I belong to the Holy Ghost Fathers, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. I belong to whatever order in the church. I am a captain of this order, and I too have been driven behind enemy lines because our encampment was overrun by the enemy. And in our case, we can never surrender. We must fight until victory or death. These are the commands and the general instructions of our leader, our Lord Jesus Christ, in our battle. My encampment has been overrun. Now my encampment is overrun. Am I to fight like Onoda? Or am I to fight like the soldiers of old? What is the instruction of Onoda? What was the value of Onoda to the Japanese army? Zilcho, pon dilcho, nothing. He was of no value whatsoever to the Japanese army, because all he did was stay alive. That's all he did. He didn't even make the farmers uncomfortable. He didn't even hurt the supply train of the enemy. He didn't do anything that soldiers are supposed to do for 30 years. He is often hailed as a hero because of his fortitude and because of his perseverance for 30 years. And it is good that he was strong for 30 years and persevered for 30 years. But there are other people that have lived in the wilderness for 30 years. The soldier is a fighter, and the soldier is at war. And imagine that all the soldiers of the last 2,000 years in the Catholic Church who were cut off behind enemy lines, and that's every single missionary. When the missionaries went to India, they could not send a fax back to Rome, "Can we build a church?" Even if St. John de Brito and St. Francis Xavier, in charge of all the Asia, he couldn't send instructions to every detail. His military commanders in the battlefield were on their own. But they were on their own physically, but they were not on their own in battle. They were fighting as representatives of Christ. They know the instructions. So we find many examples of priests in the 1970s. Each had their different personality. Father Height, for instance, he went to the bishop of the Diocese of Portland, Oregon. And the bishop said, "I want you to work for the diocese, come back to the parish." He said, "Sure, no problem. Which parish you want me to go to?" "I want you to go to St. John the Baptist." "No problem. There's only one thing, Bishop. I don't work with faggots." "Well, I can't throw out all the homosexuals in the diocese." "Well, then I'm not working for you. Goodbye." So then he went and continued his work. Another priest, Father Hannafin, my pastor, he went to the bishop and he yelled at the bishop, and the bishop was petrified of him. And he told the bishop that he was not going to say that new Mass, and he was going to continue the work of taking care of souls, and he was not asking the bishop's permission to do it. And the bishop said, "Yes, Frank, yes, Father, no problem, Father. I don't care, Father, I don't care, Father." He was scared. Another priest in Australia, Father Cummins, he was a gentle, quiet sort. He wrote a letter. In his letter he said that the priests, the faithful, have the right to the sacraments. They have the right to receive the faith, and ex officio, according to your duty as office of bishop, you're supposed to give them the sacraments. You're not doing it. You're supposed to give them the faith. You're not doing it. Therefore, I, ex caritate, obliged to pain a mortal sin, come and give them the sacraments and fulfill that duty until you decide to take on your responsibility. And this is the Code of Canon Law 682, tells me that I must do this, and therefore I obey the Code of Canon Law, and as a soldier in the army of Christ, I go into your diocese, I celebrate the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, and I will answer the call of the sheep, and I believe that I am obliged to do so under pain of mortal sin. Why? Because I am a captain in the army of Christ. I did not choose this honor of myself. I went to the seminary. I was chosen by the bishop. I was ordained a subdeacon. I was ordained a deacon. I was ordained a priest. I was put into the battlefield, and then Vatican II came. And I must continue as a soldier in an overrun army. Each one's had different personalities and different modes of reaction, but they had the same reaction. Now we see 50 years later. I've now met many of these priests, or spoke to many of them on the phone. Many of them. I can't remember most of their names. But many of these priests I've spoken to on the phone. Priests of the Novus Ordo right now. Many I've also met in person. Some of them we never got that far. Many of them never got that far. They called me, and I was asked to speak to them. I spoke with them, and they almost all say the same thing. It's a new breed of priests. They're not going to do what their ancestors did. They don't see themselves as military commanders in the army of Christ. They don't see that the church is overrun. They understand to a certain extent that it's overrun, but what is their error? They believe that they're obliged to obedience first, and that they cannot attack the enemy, that is Satan, by establishing a parish, by celebrating the Holy Sacrament of the Mass openly in public, by teaching the faith publicly, and disobedience and apparent disobedience to the local bishops, as several thousands of traditional priests did in the 1960s, 1970s, and 80s and 90s. They are not going to do that. They will not do that. And so they're not going to do that. So what happens is, what is the situation with these priests? What are they going to do? Well, we must be obedient. We're a new breed of priests. I'm going to celebrate the Latin Mass, but not in disobedience to my superior, the bishop, or my superior, the religious order. I'll celebrate it quietly and privately as long as there's no witnesses. That's the way it's not a public Mass, and I'm technically being obedient. I'm following precept number 1312, or 313, the 512 precepts that I'm obliged to follow under my diocese, like the 512 precepts of the Jews. I'm going to follow that precept, and that way they can't say I was disobedient. Several of these priests, for instance, some of our faithful asked them, Father, can I go to your Mass? And they have said, no, I'm only saying the Latin Trinity Mass. I live 5 miles away from you. I'm saying Mass in a private house. You cannot come to my Mass because the bishop said there could be no one coming to my Mass. And so it's a new breed. They want to be an army of onodas, an army of soldiers who say, I have not disobeyed a command. I have not attacked without permission, because it says in the rules and protocols of armies, privates do not charge the enemy without a directive from their superior officer. Well, that's what it says in chapter 1. But if you look into the appendix, and you look into chapter 9, you'll see that the same book of military conduct, the same book says, if the sergeant is dead, and the commanders are unable to make a decision, then the highest ranking private, he's in charge. And the highest ranking private has the authority of a general. And he then has to make his best judgment as to what is the best way to fight this war. His first priority, if possible, get back in connection with the main army. And in the process of going back in connection with his main army, if he has the opportunity to discomfit or destroy the enemy, that's what he must do. Furthermore, if he recognizes that the army is completely overrun and the army is in complete chaos, then he just simply fights the best he can to discomfit and destroy the enemy until the situation is changed. And this is the universal rule of combat, the principles of combat. So in any case, these are principles of warfare that each one knows. That's why there's a hierarchy in the military. That's why there's hierarchy in the church, for instance. In our own seminary, little seminary, every single seminarian has a precise place in the hierarchy. So that there's the rector, and then there's the vice rector, and then there's the priests, and then there's the oldest seminarian to the youngest seminarian, the deacons, and all the way down the line. And amongst the seminarians of the same class, the ones who were ordained the same day, there's the one who was the oldest to the youngest, one in charge of this, one in charge of that. So every single person knows where they fit in the hierarchy. So that if we go into war, and all of a sudden three-quarters of the army is wiped out, the other 1/4 can still function as an army. They know exactly where they fit in the hierarchy. They can regroup their soldiers. They can form a unit again and fight as soldiers according to the rules of combat. Now, in our rules of supernatural combat, how do we defeat the enemy? Number 1, as St. Paul says in the epistle today, Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not in wisdom of speech, lest the cross of Christ should be made void. Christ sent me not to baptize. Why does St. Paul say that? Of course he must baptize, but that's not his first purpose. His first purpose is to preach the gospel of Christ. So likewise, a priest must go out into a world in which there are enemies of God all around, and he must preach the gospel of Christ in season and out of season. Then he will cause converts, and they will be baptized, and they will be confirmed, and they're able to establish seminaries. They will build seminaries and establish priests and establish religious congregations. All these things can be done. We don't need a canonical direction from Rome or a canonical direction from anyone in hierarchy. Why? Because the army is overrun. Hence, the old priests, all the priests I was raised around, over 100 priests that I knew as a child, all of these old traditional priests, all different times. Remember one priest who was an old military chaplain? He always had his cigarettes rolled up on his sleeves. And he had muscles about the side he could pick up. If you got him mad, he would beat you up rather than, and then if you were still alive, you would get absolution. But the fact is, he was an old tough priest. And the fact is that he was a priest and there was a gentle priest and a tough priest and all the different types. But the fact is, they all knew what they must do. Soldiers of the army who were going for the salvation of souls, who went to where the troops of our mystical body are spread throughout the world. And there's one soldier, one of these soldiers called me just last week. Father, we're in the middle of nowhere. We've had no mass for 2 years. Can you please come and visit us? We're not going to go along with this modernist baloney. So whenever it's time, whenever it's going to be possible, I'm going to go and visit those sheep. Because it is the situation of the war in which we are. But the devil has won a great victory in these new priests. Priests coming over from the Novus Ordo. Priests leaving the diocese, leaving their religious orders, relieving their wicked congregations, seeing that there's big problems in the church, wanting to be traditional, but they will not follow the example of Christ. They won't do it. Yeah, don't worry about it. They won't do it. They will not follow the example of Christ. They won't follow the example of their ancestors. When our Lord sent out his disciples in the gospel today, he sent them 2 by 2. And what did he tell them to do? What did he tell them to do? When they arrive into a city, one priest by himself, tell the village, the kingdom of Christ has arrived. Tell them the kingdom of Christ has arrived. We are representatives of the kingdom. And what has happened? Many priests, also speaking to priests within the tradition, we had a priest meeting in France a couple years ago, and multiple priests there even said, we're just representatives of ourselves. I, Father, am representative of myself. Did I become a captain in the army to represent myself? If I became a captain in the army to represent myself, that's a definition of a traitor. A captain represents the king, the general, the army. He does not represent himself. And if a captain operates representing himself, he is an enemy of the kingdom and army to which he belongs. And what has happened is that there are all kinds of captains in Catholic tradition, all kinds of priests. Now they do establish small parishes. Why? Because they are captains unto themselves. And a captain lives by doing his masses. He lives by having his sacraments. So he gets a small enough parish, a large enough parish, to be around himself so that he can survive, so that his personal conscience can be covered. It's just like Onoda. During those 30 years, he had to eat. He couldn't buy things, so he killed the sheep. He killed the cows. He ate. He killed just enough to live. He didn't kill any more than that because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. So likewise, the modern Onodas in the army of Christ, they go around and they don't want to attack too much attention to themselves because it may cause danger to their life. They don't want to put themselves in unnecessary danger because their first priority is to survive. If you want to survive, and that's your first priority, don't join the army. Because soldiers join the army in order to go into battle where it's dangerous and where they might die. And that is why we join the army of Christ. We go to the place where Christ is not. We go to the place where we are hated. We go to the place where the enemies of God are in order to convert them to Christ. We take the friends of God and we gather them together. And the enemies find us and they try to destroy us and we fight. That's what a captain does. Now we have captains who are going to say, well, I'm a good person. I'm a good captain. I don't believe in Satan. I don't believe in modernism. I don't believe in Bishop Fillet's wicked decisions. For instance, these modern priests in the Society of St. Pius X, I am against the liberalism. I am against the modernism. So I am against it. I don't like it. But I am not going to profess publicly against it like St. Paul would. I am not going to form an army against these wicked leaders, or the ones that are doing wicked things, even if they are not personally wicked. I am not going to do my duty as a captain. The captain must fulfill his duty. The new breed of traditional priests, they are going to be priests, and there are already many of them who say, my first duty is to be obedient. To be obedient. If that was the case, there would be no tradition. There would be no army. There would be no way to win any war. The fact is, Archbishop Lefebvre was disobedient. Father Hannafin, my pastor, was disobedient, and lists the several thousands of traditional priests in those years between 1965 and 2012 and until this very day. The vast majority of them disobedient. They are standing in disobedience to their bishops, to their religious orders. Why? Because the religious orders and the superiors of those orders and the rules and regulations of those orders and dioceses are the rules and regulations of the devil. They have been overrun by Satan, and we are not being overrun by Satan. The enemy is flushed through our camps. We are now behind the enemy lines. We are not in the enemy's camp. Therefore, it is our duty to fight them. And we are not worried that our commander, whose name is Bishop Judas this and Bishop Judas that and Bishop Judas the other and Superior Father Judas this and Superior Father Judas that, these are whichever one of these Judases they are, we don't obey their commands because they have been overrun by the enemy and because they are fighting against Christ and using the weapons and teachings of the enemy. Therefore, we fight against them as any soldier is obliged to do, so that when our king comes back, he will come back and he will see which of you servants have been faithful servants. What's a servant? A servant is not someone that stays alive. Master of the house. And while you were gone, all the other servants tore up the house. But I faithfully ate only enough food to keep myself alive. I didn't tear anything up. Whenever they were tearing things up, I always went to the next room. Whenever they did something bad, I went around. I never did anything bad. Did you save one piece of furniture? Yeah, my chair I sit in and my bed I sleep in. I saved 2 pieces of furniture. And I also saved some good food. Then I saved the refrigerator. I saved all those things necessary for me to live until you came back. And when you came back, I'm ready to do whatever you want me to do. What's the first thing you want me to do? The first thing I want you to do is commit hara-kiri. That's your first instruction. Take out your little Japanese sword, because I don't want to waste a bullet on you, and then cut your own guts out, and then find a way to dig a hole first. So we don't have to do, all we have to do is throw some dirt on top of it. What is a servant? He's one that serves his master. He serves his master. So that if I am a servant in a house, and they're trying to destroy the things of the house, I will try to save things of the house and hide them. I will try to fight against the other servants that are doing wicked things. I will defend my master. And if I'm killed in the process, I will be hailed a hero. If I live, then I will be rewarded by my master. But it is not the duty of the servant to simply stay alive. And this is a grave error of the new traditional priests. The most timid traditional priest, the most quiet traditional priest of those first years after the council, particularly up until the 1990, all of these priests, they said, we are captains in the army, we fight for the army, we are members of the kingdom of Christ, we are not on our own, we still hail to obedience to the bishop and obedience to the pope and obedience to Christ, but right now the army, the chancery is run over by the enemy, the Rome is run over by the enemy, so we stand firm and fight according to our original instructions until such time as this crisis is over. When is it over? That's up to God. Between now and then, we fight. So an appeal to priests who are now saying, I don't want to say the Latin New Mass anymore. I don't want to follow the wicked ways of Bishop Fillet or the Fraternity of St. Peter or the Institute of Christ the King or whatever the false organization is anymore. I want to be able to tell my people the truth. I want to not be bad in my diocese anymore. Stand firmly for the truth publicly. Go out and find faithful who need Christ and who want to find the truth. Do not be secret and private in your communication of the truth, but fight and discomfit the enemy. And find other priests which we can be with in the fight. And if you can't, well then fight alone. but fight as an army of Christ, and not just to survive until the time is up, until the Christ comes back. God bless you all, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.